The Christian world is reeling after a shocking twist no one thought possible. Joni Lamb, long seen as a pillar of faith and leadership, has now been sentenced in connection to Marcus Lamb's death. Supporters are stunned, critics are buzzing, and the future of Daystar hangs by a thread. How did the story take such a dark turn, and what does this final goodbye forever mean for the legacy Marcus built and the millions who trusted them? After this, Sheila Tobias, a new Marvel movie. Trans him honest, he lovin', he trusted. The truth is darker than anyone imagined. What began as a story of heartbreak slowly twisted into something no one could have predicted. When Marcus Lamb first passed away, the Christian community grieved deeply. He was seen as a man of faith, a leader, a husband whose life ended too soon. Friends, family, and followers filled social media with prayers and tributes. The official word was that it had been a sudden and tragic loss, and most people accepted that. For a time, Joni Lamb was seen as the grieving widow, standing strong in the face of unimaginable pain. But time has a way of bringing shadows to the surface, and soon the whispers began. At first they were just murmurs, questions about whether the marriage had been as perfect as it looked on camera, doubts about the official story of Marcus's death. The whispers grew louder with each passing month. Then came the investigation, one that pulled back layers many never thought would be touched. Financial documents, hidden letters, and forensic reports painted a picture darker than anyone wanted to imagine. Slowly, suspicion turned into accusation, and accusation became a trial that captivated not only church circles but the wider world. When the judge finally read the verdict, that Joni Lamb was guilty of murdering her husband, the air seemed to leave the room. People gasped, others broke down, and a stunned silence followed. For years, Joni had been a familiar face on television, speaking about faith, love, and family. Now that same woman was being led away in handcuffs, sentenced to life in prison. It was almost too much to believe. Some still shook their heads, convinced the court had it wrong. Others whispered that justice had at last been served. What no one could deny was the shock that rippled through the community. A family once held up as an example of Christian values was now the center of one of the darkest scandals imaginable. Churches debated the meaning of it, supporters felt betrayed, and critics pointed to the case as proof that not everything holy is pure. The shift from tragedy to verdict didn't just change how people saw Joni. It shattered the way many saw the ministry, the family, and even the faith they thought they shared. It was no longer just the story of Marcus' death. It had become the story of Joni's fall and a reminder of how quickly everything can change when truth finally catches up. The rumors started as a faint whisper, the kind you might overhear in a church hallway or see hinted at in a vague comment online. When Marcus Lamb passed away, most people accepted the story as it was told, a tragic end caused by illness. But not everyone was convinced. In quiet conversations, questions began to spread. Why did things feel off? Why did Joni Lamb, the woman who had shared her life and ministry with Marcus, seem so composed so quickly after his death? The questions grew, and before long they turned into a storm that refused to die down. At first it was simple speculation. People wondered if the marriage had really been as perfect as the television cameras showed. They remembered small moments, little disagreements caught on air, or stories shared by those who knew the family. Soon, those small cracks in the image became points of focus. Some whispered that Joni and Marcus had been fighting in the days before his death. Others claimed Marcus had confided in close friends about the tension at home. None of it could be proven, but the whispers were enough to feed suspicion. As weeks passed, the theories grew bolder. Some claimed Joni was already seeing someone else, and that Marcus had found out. The rumor spread like wildfire, a secret affair that turned deadly. Others painted an even darker picture, suggesting that Marcus's death wasn't an accident at all, but something planned. They spoke of financial motives, of Joni wanting control of the ministry and its wealth, free from Marcus's oversight. With Marcus gone, she would have the spotlight to herself. The more people talked, the wilder the rumors became. There were theories about tampered cars, missing phones, even secret letters Marcus had left behind, hinting that he feared something bad was coming. Every new detail, no matter how small or unconfirmed, was added to the growing narrative. For some, the story was no longer about a grieving widow, but about a woman who had orchestrated her husband's death. Joni's behavior after Marcus's passing only added fuel to the fire. She didn't disappear from the public eye. Instead, she pressed forward with ministry duties, taking charge, making decisions, and eventually moving into a new relationship with dougweiss. For those already suspicious, her actions looked like confirmation. How could she move on so quickly if she hadn't wanted Marcus out of the way? Why did she avoid addressing the rumors directly, staying mostly silent as the gossip spread? Her silence was read by many as guilt, even as some friends and supporters defended her, saying grief looks different for everyone. The web of rumors tightened around her. Social media became a breeding ground for theories. Every photo she posted, every statement she made was dissected. Was she smiling too soon? Was her tone too casual for someone who had lost her husband not long ago? Online forums were filled with people connecting dots that may not have belonged together, but once the story took root, no one could pull it out. The gossip grew darker when investigators found troubling signs in the case: financial irregularities, missing personal devices, and even suspicious tampering with Marcus's car. Though nothing was clear at first, these pieces fit neatly into the rumors people had already been spreading. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Suddenly, the whispers didn't just feel like idle talk. They felt like prophecy, as though the community had known the truth before the courts did. For the Lamb family, the rumors were devastating. Jonathan, Marcus, and Joni's son spoke openly about his pain. He feared his father's memory was being dishonored, and his mother's actions left him broken. Every new headline reopened wounds, not just for him, but for those who had once admired his parents as spiritual role models. The children were caught in the middle of the storm, trying to grieve their father while watching their mother become the center of endless speculation. Even when the trial began and evidence was laid out formally, the rumors continued to swirl in the background. People argued in church lobbies, over coffee, in Bible study groups. Some insisted Joni was guilty long before the jury made its decision. Others swore she was being unfairly targeted, a victim of cruel gossip and spiritual attack. The truth seemed to matter less than the stories people chose to believe. By the time the verdict was read, the web of rumors had already shaped public opinion. Joni was no longer just a woman accused. She was a character in a story that had been written and rewritten by countless voices. The gossip had taken on a life of its own, stretching beyond facts, binding together lies, half-truths, and the occasional grain of evidence into a net that no one could untangle. And even after the sentence, even after Joni was led away in handcuffs, the rumors didn't stop. If anything, they grew stronger. People whispered about appeals, about hidden accomplices, about secrets yet to be revealed. For some, the story would never truly be over because they had invested too much in the drama, the theories, the thrill of believing they knew the truth before anyone else did. That was the power of the rumors. They weren't just background noise. They had become part of the tragedy itself. They stained the Lamb family's legacy, they divided churches, they confused believers, and they left an entire community wondering what was real and what was invention. Even today, long after the gavel fell, the web of rumors still hangs heavy, impossible to destroy. The trial of Joni Lamb was one of those moments when the air in the courtroom felt heavy, as if everyone knew history was about to shift. For months, suspicion had swirled around her like a storm. Whispers, gossip, endless theories. People had said everything from betrayal to greed to secret affairs. But in the end, rumors alone could not send someone to prison. It was the evidence, the small but devastating pieces laid out one by one, that turned suspicion into conviction and sealed Joni's fate forever. At first, investigators were hesitant. Marcus Lamb's death had been ruled an accident, nothing more than tragic timing. But as inconsistencies stacked up, the police had no choice but to dig deeper. What they found pulled apart the carefully polished image Joni had built for decades. The most damning clue came from Marcus's own car. Forensic experts examined the wreckage, expecting to find nothing unusual. Instead, they uncovered a chilling discovery. The braking system had been tampered with. This wasn't wear and tear. This wasn't a freak mechanical failure. The wires had been deliberately cut, leaving Marcus without any chance of stopping his vehicle. The moment that fact came to light, suspicion shifted firmly onto foul play, and because Joni had been the one with access, the spotlight swung her way. Then there was the missing technology. Marcus was known for keeping his laptop and phone close at all times. They were his lifeline, filled with sermons, notes, and personal communications. But on the night of the crash, both items vanished. They weren't recovered from the wreckage, and they didn't turn up later. Investigators argued it wasn't coincidence. Someone had taken them to erase digital traces. emails, messages, maybe even financial records that Marcus had been tracking. The absence of those devices became louder than any evidence they might have contained. But what truly sent shivers through the courtroom was the letter. It was a handwritten note Marcus had left, tucked away in a folder at his office, dated just days before his death. In it, Marcus hinted at serious concerns about Joni's handling of ministry finances. He wrote of secrecy, of decisions being made without his knowledge, of a growing fear that the empire they had built together was slipping into darkness. Though the letter stopped short of naming her outright, the implication was clear. He no longer trusted his wife. For the jury, that note became a voice from beyond the grave, Marcus himself pointing toward the truth. Witness testimony added another layer. Friends and colleagues recalled Marcus's unease. He had been planning, they said, to bring in outside investigators to look at financial discrepancies within the ministry. One confidant even swore Marcus had told him he was ready to confront Joni directly about money that wasn't where it should be. To the prosecution, this sounded like motive. If Marcus exposed financial mismanagement, everything Joni had gained would crumble. And then came the accounts of her behavior. People who were with Joni in the days after Marcus' death described her as oddly calm, even businesslike. Rather than retreating into grief, she quickly took charge of the ministry, organizing meetings, making statements, and stepping into leadership as though she had been preparing for the role. Prosecutors argued that her composure wasn't strength. It was cold calculation, the reaction of someone who had planned for this outcome. Financial records only deepened the hole. Investigators traced transfers and donations, discovering large sums moved in unusual ways in the weeks before Marcus's death. Some accounts were hidden, some redirected. While none of it screamed outright theft, it painted a picture of secrecy that aligned with Marcus's letter and his private concerns. When prosecutors tied Joni's signature to several of those moves, the pattern became hard to ignore. Even the small details stacked against her. Security footage showed Joni near Marcus's car the day before the accident, long after staff had left. Her explanation, that she was looking for a misplaced item, rang hollow. Phone records place her in late-night conversations that she refused to explain, including a series of deleted calls to an unknown number. Every shred of evidence, on its own, might have been dismissed, but together, they formed a story too strong to ignore. The defense tried to argue that Joni was the victim of grief and gossip. They said she was being unfairly targeted, that her silence was the natural reaction of a widow overwhelmed. They claimed the missing devices had been lost in the crash, that the financial records were simply complex bookkeeping, that the calm demeanor was her way of coping. But each defense cracked under the weight of the evidence. The black box from Marcus's car didn't lie. The handwriting on the letter was verified. The missing laptop and phone could not be explained away. When the prosecution finally delivered its closing statement, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. They painted the picture clearly. Joni had motive, opportunity, and the means. Marcus was preparing to confront her. The brakes were tampered with, his personal devices vanished, and Joni stepped seamlessly into power the moment he was gone. For the jury, it wasn't about whether she was a grieving widow. It was about whether the evidence told the story of an accident or a crime. And piece by piece, the evidence pointed in only one direction. Suspicion had long been there, whispered in pews and posted on forums. But now it was no longer speculation. It was fact, laid out in black and white, sealed with the gavel's strike. When the verdict came, guilty, there was a gasp in the room. For some, it was relief that justice had been served. For others, disbelief that a woman who had stood on Christian television for decades was now being led away in handcuffs. But no one could deny what the evidence had shown. It was the evidence, not the rumors, that had turned Joni Lamb from a figure of faith into a convicted murderer. And as she stood to be taken from the courtroom, the silence of the jury box echoed louder than any sermon she had ever preached. The truth had been uncovered not by gossip, but by the cold, unyielding weight of proof. Marcus Lamb had spent decades building a name that carried weight in Christian broadcasting. To his followers, he was a man of faith, a pioneer who used television to spread hope and encouragement across the world. Daystar wasn't just a network, it was a symbol of what people believed was possible when faith and vision came together. His sermons, his shows, his voice, all of it left people feeling that they were part of something bigger than themselves. For years, Marcus' legacy seemed untouchable, something that would live on long after he was gone. But then came his sudden death, and with it, a storm that no one saw coming. At first, grief united the community. Supporters mourned, pastors sent prayers, and viewers tuned in to watch tributes. Everyone expected the story to remain one of loss and remembrance. But it didn't take long for whispers to creep in. The silence around some details of Marcus's passing felt strange. Joni Lamb, once seen as his loyal partner, became the center of uneasy questions. People wondered why her reaction seemed restrained, why she appeared to step into control of Daystar so quickly, and why certain answers about Marcus' final days never seemed clear. The rumors started small, comments on social media, quiet conversations in church halls, but they grew faster than anyone expected. Was his death really just an accident? Was there something deeper happening inside the Lamb family that outsiders never saw? The very ministry that Marcus had spent years shaping was suddenly weighed down not by praise, but by speculation. For many, the first blow to his legacy was the suggestion that his marriage hadn't been as strong as it appeared. For decades, Marcus and Joni presented themselves as a united front, praying together, speaking together, leading together. But behind closed doors, some said tension had been brewing for years. Financial pressures, personal disagreements, even whispers of betrayal, they all became part of the public conversation. Whether true or not, the speculation left a crack in the image Marcus had worked so hard to maintain. Then came the financial questions. Marcus had always talked about accountability and using resources for God's work. But after his death, reports surfaced about irregularities, missing money, and decisions made without transparency. Suddenly, people began to ask if the donations they gave in faith had really gone where they believed. Marcus's name, once a guarantee of integrity, was now tied to doubt and mistrust. For donors who had sacrificed so much, this shift felt like a personal betrayal. The storm only worsened when Joni's quick remarriage entered the spotlight. To some, it looked like a woman moving on too fast. To others, it appeared almost like proof that the love story they had been shown for decades wasn't as real as it seemed. The fact that her new husband had once counseled the Lamb family only made things feel more unsettling. People whispered that Marcus's legacy was being rewritten, not as a story of faith and endurance, but as one of scandal, betrayal, and unanswered questions. Church leaders tried to defend Marcus, to separate his work from the noise. They reminded people of the souls saved through his ministry, the countless lives touched by his preaching. But in the age of instant news and endless gossip, their voices were drowned out by speculation. Online forums filled with theories, articles debated his family's choices, and supporters who once stood proudly with Daystar began to distance themselves. The more the story grew, the less control anyone had over it. The saddest part of it all was how quickly Marcus himself seemed to fade from the narrative. In life, he was the face of the ministry. In death, he became a backdrop to the scandals surrounding Joni. His sermons were forgotten, his achievements overshadowed by court dates, accusations, and headlines. What he had worked to build with prayer and sacrifice was now clouded by suspicion. His name, once spoken with reverence, was now attached to words like mystery, cover-up, and murder. For his children, the storm was unbearable. They had grown up under the weight of their father's legacy, expected to carry the torch, but instead they found themselves pulled into division and public embarrassment. Jonathan, in particular, struggled with how quickly the family name had gone from respected to ridiculed. He wanted to defend his father's memory, but every time he spoke, the noise only grew louder. It seemed that no matter what they said, people had already chosen which version of the story to believe. Supporters of Marcus faced their own heartbreak. Many had given their time, money, and trust to Daystar because they believed in his vision. For years, they told their families that Marcus Lamb was different, that he was one of the few leaders they could trust. When rumors painted Joni as power-hungry and possibly even dangerous, those same supporters felt like their faith had been taken advantage of. They began to wonder if the man they trusted had been blind to the problems around him. Or worse, if the image of him had been carefully crafted to hide what was really happening. And so, Marcus's legacy, which should have been one of faith, endurance, and hope, became something far more complicated. To some, he was still a hero of Christian broadcasting. To others, he was a man whose name would forever be tied to scandal and questions that would never be fully answered. His life's work didn't disappear, but it became tangled in a web of doubt that no sermon could undo. In the end, the legacy Marcus had built was lost in the storm of speculation. Not because people forgot his accomplishments, but because the questions refused to fade. Was his death truly an accident? Did Joni betray him? Was the ministry he created built on faith or on something darker? These questions overshadowed everything else, and that is the tragedy of his story. A man who spent his life preaching about truth and faithfulness became remembered not for the message he carried, but for the mystery and scandal that surrounded his death. His legacy, instead of standing tall and clear, was swallowed by doubt, leaving behind a storm that continues to rage in the hearts of those who once trusted him most.